Nice. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to these workshops, and thanks for coming close to the stage as well, because otherwise it will have been a bit empty. My name is Ewan, and I'll be your animator for today's workshop on the Green Charter, From Intentions to Action, implementing the MSCA Green Charter in research projects. So first of all, I hope all of you had a good lunch. Who had salmon? Okay. Who had chicken? Okay. Who took the full vegetarian option? Okay. So I hope you had a good lunch. Now you are full indigestion. All of your blood is stuck in your stomach. So I don't want you guys to be sleeping. So if you want, we can just start with a quick exercise. So I will ask all of you to stand up, please. Come on. To make sure all of this blood goes to your beautiful brain, and we can all have meaningful discussions together. So first of all, I will ask you to stretch to the sky. Come on, let's go. Down to your knees. Your toes for the one that can do it. Wow, we're against the sky. The toes. Sky. And we stop. Okay. Head, left and right. Okay, greet your neighbor. Shake the hands if you like, even if it's not COVID friendly. Okay, now the mood is about right. So I will first start to invite our speakers to join on the stage. So I will have Martin Farley to come and sit. Ana Rodriguez, and Alexandra Dubini, and Paolo Tomasetti. Thank you very much. And we have Marlene Bart. Bart, that's a nice way to say it?
It's Barthes.
Barthes, okay, nice name. So we have Marlene Barthes that is joining us remotely from Brussels. And I will first start with the quick description of what this session is about. So we all know what we're speaking. So as you know, the global warming is a massive threat to the future, may it be for our ecosystem, our health, our activities, our cities, our coastlines, everything. So science has to play its part, and not only in research and finding new ways, new solutions, but also in the way to be green. As we were mentioning earlier, less plane, better food at conferences, trying to find new sustainable approaches to the work we do. And in this objective, the Green Charter, inside the Green Deal, you may have heard about it, aims to make the science more green in order to reduce our impact on the ecosystems, on generic global warming. Maybe by train, but maybe the plane that we use, maybe the means of transport, or also the materials, on the way we consider our mobility. So we first start with a quick description of the data gathered by the MSCA team, and to understand what is the first step of the implementation of this Green Charter. And Marlene Barthes will tell us about it, as she is part of the MSCA team at the European Commission in DG EAC. Is that okay? Thank you. Let's go.
Okay. I realize now that you have an awfully big screen, and so my head appears as awfully big as well, so my apologies for that. Yes, I'll try to briefly walk you through what we're doing at EU level to make the MSCA greener. And I'll start maybe more by setting the political frame. So if you move to the next slide, just a little bit to set the scene of the framework we're operating in at EU level. So I guess that most of you, especially if you're in this session, are aware of the European Green Deal, which is the EU's quite ambitious new growth strategy, which was adopted in 2020. And with this, we basically aim to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. Europe as a continent, which, as I said, is very ambitious. We do have specific targets to reach this. There's a lot of policy initiatives happening. We do have a lot of funding also to make this happen. More or less, I think 1/3 of the EU's budget is dedicated to achieving the goals of the European Green Deal. In the area of higher education and research and innovation, which is maybe more interesting for you today, these here on this slide are just a number of initiatives that are happening now. So, for instance, the European Strategy for Universities, which was briefly mentioned this morning already by Claire Morel, my head of unit. In there, one of the 4 main objectives actually is to, well, there are 4 objectives to help higher education institutions to adapt to changing conditions, including climate change. So higher education institutions are key actors to make the transition towards a more green and digital economy. We also have a sort of competence framework on education for sustainability. We do have the Education for Climate Coalition, which is actually open to anyone who would like to join. So I would encourage you to do that as well, which is linked to the European Climate Pact. And then, as I said, we also have funding instruments which try and help to try to be greener. So, for instance, the Erasmus Plus program, but also Horizon Europe, which is what or what our discussions today will be focusing more on, and more specifically the MSCA. So if we look at the next slide, you will see that actually under Horizon Europe, which has a huge budget for 7 years, so 95.5 billion euros, 35% of that budget are earmarked to reach certain climate targets, and we have specific indicators to track this expenditure and make sure that we're going in the right direction. Now, as you know, the MSCA are a bit the odd one out, if I can say, because we are a bottom-up program, meaning that we cannot impose top-down, which projects should fund what in the area of climate change. But we have seen, looking at statistics, that actually a lot of our projects do contribute to the objectives of the European Green Deal, but more driven from researchers on the ground. So if we look at the MSCA more specifically on the next slide, the budget is also quite generous, 6.6 billion euros for the next until 2027. We're part of Pillar 1 of Horizon Europe, and we do have a worldwide coverage. This was also mentioned earlier this morning, that actually we do have a very strong international dimension within the MSCA, which obviously also has an impact on the environment, notably through traveling, because, well, the MSCA is not a mobility program per se, but a lot of our activities are actually mobility related. So we do have quite an impact on the environment. So we've tried to actually find out from the projects that we fund whether or not they were aware of the European Green Deal and whether or not they were already implementing any sustainability measures, which you can see on the next slide. So this was actually carried out in the framework of the MCAA, not MSCA, Major Impact Survey. So a large-scale survey that went out in 2020, and in which we included specific questions covering the Green Deal. We've had a very high response rate, so over 1,500 respondents, trying to kind of get a feel of what is happening. And you will see actually that on the question of whether or not these people were aware or not of the European Green Deal, we see that, well, more or less 50%, but more than 50% actually said that no, they were not aware of the European Green Deal. We have asked whether or not there were at institutional level sustainability strategies in place or green policies in the institutions. Here, more positively, I think the reply is 48% that yes, they do have sustainability strategies in place. And then on the question on whether or not the projects themselves had measures in place to reduce their environmental impact and promote sustainable action, here again, the majority of replies were that actually no, this was not the case. Now, on the next slide, we have a little bit of a summary of, for those projects who replied that yes, they were implementing measures to reduce the impact of their projects. These were the most common answers. So, for instance, by recycling and reducing waste, by using digital tools as complement to physical mobility, by using more sustainable transportation means, reducing single-use plastics, sharing equipment between labs, for example, underutilized instrument, or by prioritizing the use of renewable energy. We've asked there were two follow-up questions on the next slide, more on the type of support that these people received or the reasons for which they did not implement any measures to reduce environmental impact of their activities. So in terms of support, we see that actually the vast majority of those who have measures in place have received top-down support from their hierarchy. So I think this is a clear message to leadership at institutions. And 24% as well said that they have received financial support to do so. And then when we look more at the reasons for not implementing any measures, these were more various. I mean, here we have only a few summarized, but basically there was a lack of knowledge and information, no institutional or hierarchical support, lack of financial support, or lack of incentives. And then finally, in the same survey, we also asked respondents, as you will see on the next slide, to make some proposals or whether or not they agreed with some proposals to make the MSCA greener in the future. Here again, we had quite some large number of responses, so over 1,500, and the most popular options are listed here. So number one would be more guidance from the European Commission on how to green a project, more communication and promotion of best practice examples, which I think is quite relevant, as this is what we're trying to do today with this event, digital tools as complement to physical mobility. So we're talking here maybe more of virtual mobility, incentives to use more sustainable transportation means, an MSCA Green Award, for example, for outstanding projects, possibly a green evaluation criteria at selection or application stage, and an MSCA Green Charter. So taking this into account, we have tried to brainstorm a little bit on as you will see on the next slide, to see what concretely the MSCA could do to contribute to the Green Deal. And I think here we have to consider it in two blocks. So first, implementation-wise, what can the program do better in terms of concrete implementation of projects? So there we have developed this Green Charter, which I'll get to in a minute. Projects will have to report at final report stage. So all MSCA projects will have to report on whether or not they have followed the principles in the Green Charter. We have issued some guidance material, which I will also show you later on, and we will soon publish some success stories. And then if we look more at the content, even though we're bottom up, as I said, we do fund a large variety of projects that contribute to Commission priorities, including those covered by the Green Deal. And so what we are trying to do at Commission level, and that was briefly mentioned this morning as well, is so-called cluster events, where we bring together successful projects and policymakers to try and discuss and network and share their knowledge. So we had one in July last year on the Green Deal specifically, and we're having one on the 7th of June, so in a couple of weeks, which will be focusing on ocean and water. So in case you're interested, obviously you're very welcome to attend these. Now, if we look at the Green Charter, So the MSCA Green Charter, this is something that we have developed under Horizon Europe. So it didn't exist under Horizon 2020. I reassure you, I didn't come up with a charter myself, as I'm not an environmental expert by background, but we have convened a group of experts who have helped us come up with this Green Charter. And so this extract here, the citation on this slide, is what is in the work program and the MSCA work program of Horizon Europe, where we clearly say that all MSCA funded projects are encouraged to address the principles of the MSCA Green Charter. So here, I think the key word is encouraged. So we're not forcing anyone. No? This is not mandatory, as you know, and we keep saying the MSCA are still a bottom-up program. So we do not want to penalize any projects with making this mandatory. However, we will and we are monitoring this then at final report stage. So projects, even if they have done nothing to green their activity, they will have to report on it. And we hope that by doing this, we will stimulate some reflection and maybe also raise awareness about the Green Deal and our efforts in achieving its objectives. Because, well, as we saw from the survey that I've just mentioned, until when the survey was carried out, 50% of our projects didn't even know about the Green Deal. So maybe raising awareness is a first soft step of reaching our goals. The next slide is just a highlight of what is in that Green Charter. These are just the principles related to travel, because I think the MSCA being a sort of mobility program, I think travel does have an impact. So there are quite straightforward principles, I would say. For instance, to prioritize low carbon forms of transportation, to employ teleconferencing tools as a complement to physical attendance at events where such attendance is not strictly necessary nor advantageous. So I think it's important to say that the MSCA, I mean, the idea of the MSCA and being mobile and experiencing different cultural contexts is still one of the main principles of the program and will remain so. So here you have only the travel related principles. Obviously there's way more. So, as a reducing, reusing, recycling, green purchasing for materials, project related materials, ensuring the sustainability of project related events. So, going local, avoiding to print, attendance lists or programs, using renewable forms of energy, sharing best practices, etc. So this is for the Green Charter. On the next slide, you will see that we have, together with the Charter, tried to publish or come up with guidance material. Because, well, it's easy to tell people what to do, but it's usually easier if you give them concrete examples of how they could do it. So here you have some of the examples that we have tried to compile together, again, with the help of environmental experts or sustainability experts in higher education. So for instance, travel guidelines, but also institutional green practices. So really a compilation of best practices at institutional level. The next slide, you will see some more general guidelines, also including Commission guidelines that we are supposed to use ourselves on how to organize sustainable events, how to pick maybe an eco hotel or, a hotel that has an eco label for professional trips and conferences, international standards for environmental management, green public procurement, etc., etc. So all this is out there on our website, and well, I encourage people to have a look, especially if they don't know exactly where to start yet. I mentioned briefly also that we we are gathering success stories concretely of projects that are managing to green their activities. So we will be publishing these on our website very soon as well. And then my second to last slide, it's just examples of MSCA funding. So for now, we have decided not to change the funding for MSCA projects to give them, for example, more money for greening their activities, because we do consider that for now the funding is quite generous as it is, and especially the research, training, and networking costs could be used to achieve some of the principles of the Green Charter. I mean, for instance, to be used also for carbon offsetting, but and this is, I think, ongoing work, and we will see in the future if this needs to be revised based also on feedback that we get from projects who are trying to green their activities. So I'll be happy to listen to the roundtable later on, and maybe questions or feedback from the audience as well. And so to finalize, I mean, the last slide is really just, some considerations for the future that might be addressed at some point during the discussions today or also in coming months. So as I just said, green budget, yes or no. Virtual mobility, I know that we have already introduced more flexibility, for instance, for secondments under doctoral networks, co-fund and postdoctoral fellowships. Green award criteria, I mean, this is something that we should at application stage already introduce, or for instance, also, at commission level, maybe issuing a carbon footprint calculator, because as we know, if you're expected to change something, you need to first understand the problem. So this would maybe be a first step in that direction. So in a nutshell, this is what's happening at EU level, and I'll be happy to listen to the roundtable and see what kind of suggestions you as practitioners can come up with towards us and other interested participants.
All right. Thank you, Marlene. One question, maybe? No? No question? Okay, we can keep moving. Thank you very much for your presentation. Our next speaker now is Paolo Tomasetti, which will give us an insight on his work as an MSCA laureate towards the greening of human activities and generally the labor around it. So Paolo is working at the University of Aix-Marseille, and he's working mostly on law, on social issues around the labor, on how to green it. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I stand here so I can use that microphone?
Je sais pas s'il marche.
Okay. So I can stand here and use this one, perhaps. Can you hear me? Yes. No? Can you hear me?
No, take this one.
Hello, hello.
Oh.
So this one is working, and then you can use this one. Sorry.
As you prefer.
Okay, so now you can hear me. Basically, I'm a labor lawyer, but I look at the intersections between labor law and environmental law. I'm conducting my Marie Curie fellowship at Aix-Marseille University, and my project is named Greta, like Greta Thunberg. It stands for Groundbreaking Research on Employment and Environmental Transitions Ahead. And I actually want to analyze the impacts of the energy transition on the labor market and how workers and their representatives react to the employment implications of the energy transition. But I also look at the active role that workers in workplaces can take to greening their work activities and to promote environmental sustainability. So basically, I like to introduce my research topic and my fellowship as a 9 direct contribution to environmental sustainability, because I analyze institutions and social practices to deconstruct the labor versus environment conflict. I organize beyond research capacity building and training programs with stakeholders, including social partners, trade unions representatives, and employers associations on how to make labor and environmental sustainability convergent. And as a lawyer, I try to elaborate policy setting and legislative reform proposals to shift from a linear to a systemic type of protection in which labor and environmental values are pursued simultaneously. So I'm not sure I can say my research project directly contribute to environmental sustainability, but indirectly, of course, yes, because of the research topic itself. What I want to share with you today, it's an overview on how environmental sustainability is informing the employment relationship of every kind of job, every kind of work activity, beyond research and beyond the contents of the European Commission Green Charter for Marie Curie fellowships. The Green Charter is actually a part of a broader trend, a trend in which environmental sustainability really is penetrating in the objective of the employment contract. So the principle of sustainable development should inform our employment relationship irrespective of the job activity and the sector we are working in. And the principle of sustainable development applied to contractual relationship, without going too much into the details, tells us that if a work activity can be replaced by an equivalent one which is more environmentally sustainable, we should perform the latter. And the Green Charter is one of the existing examples, growing normative examples of how environmental concerns integrate the objectives of the employment contract. Now, I wrote a monograph on labor law and environmental sustainability, and I use around 300 pages to argue that environmental sustainability is within the object of any employment contract and of any contract in general. But I will not go into details to explain you the argument behind this thesis. But as an example, I want to bring these new provisions from the Chinese civil code, which is one of the most important civil codes worldwide. And if you see general provisions in Chapter 1 and the performance of contract provision in Article 509, you see that they also ask that when conducting a civil activity, a person of the civil law shall act in a manner that facilitates conservation of resources and protection of the ecological environment. And again, the parties of a contract shall avoid wasting the resources, polluting the environment, or damaging the ecology in the course of performance of the contract. This is not for comparison. This is just an example to show how really environmental values are informing the contracts, etc. Looking again beyond the Green Charter, one important principle that is informing research processes beyond the contents of the Green Charters is the so-called do no significant harm principle. Do no significant harm principle means that every kind of activity should be concerned with environmental sustainability, conservation of resources used in the process of conducting research or any kind of activity. This principle is regulated in the regulation on the so-called taxonomy for sustainability projects and activities across Europe. And this has become a very important principle in the access of EU fundings, including research funds. So we find this principle, for example, regulated in the Next Generation EU and National Recovery and Resilience plans after the pandemic. And we could also say that, for example, compliance with the Marie Curie Green Charter could be a way to comply with the do not significant harm principle. So in our research project within for example, the Next Generation EU or National Recovery Resilience plans projects, we could recall, for example, the European Commission Marie Curie Green Charter as a way to show how we would like to implement the principle of do no significant harm. There are other examples, but I will not go into details. Some of the side effects of the implementation of the European Commission Green Charter for the employment relationship. as long as we said before, we would be asked to report on the ways we have sought to minimize the environmental impact of our research activities, we, as researchers, as employees, should claim the equivalent right to monitor how our employers apply the Charter, to denounce violations of environmental regulations, and even to refuse to perform unsustainable work activities. And this is also consistent with other EU regulation, for example, the whistleblowing directive. And if relevant, we should also ask to receive environmental training. This is not formally provided in the European Commission Green Charter, but this is a reasonable consequence of its accurate implementation. So some final thoughts. First of all, it's not easy to define environmental sustainability. This is a contested and questioned concept. So it's really hard to decide whether or not an activity is sustainable in terms of environmental impact, especially in the workplace. Sometimes there are controversial effects of seeming environmental friendly policy. For example, there is empirical evidence showing that remote working does not necessarily have a positive impact on the environment. And an important reflection, in my opinion, should be about the importance to greening research progress and topics rather than research process only. And I think that the proposal to provide award criteria linked to environmental sustainability of research topics in the selection phase could go in this direction. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Paolo. Or maybe you can just look at the table there. On the table. Sorry. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paolo. Does anyone have a question? Come on. Okay, I do. So, here. Yeah, please.
Just what do you mean by training on environmental issues?
Well, training on environmental issues means to learn how we can actually implement green policies in our research. So having, for example, the idea from our institution of what rules they have to respect in order to comply with the environmental standards. For example, if you think about specific research sectors, like those involved in chemical kind of research, they have specific regulations applied to the research process. And so, for example, when we start our researches in a given institution, we should be fully aware of what are the obligations that the institution should respect in order to comply with environmental standards. As long as we are expected to comply with those standards, we should be aware, and therefore, for example, a specific training like the one that every worker take on occupational health and safety, but in the specific dimension of environmental sustainability should be appropriate, I think, to implement a Green Charter properly. This is just an example. But in general, I think that, for example, all the good guidelines that are provided in the Green Charter could be the object of a training for researchers and other employees that are employed in a research environment.
Thank you very much. As you see on the stage, there is someone missing. It was supposed to be Claude Grison, which is a research director at the CNRS in Montpellier, in the south of France. But she can't be here today because she's been elected as a European Inventor of the Year. And so I think it's a fair excuse. And I'm not too surprised because she's author of more than 211 papers on 44 reviews on this kind of thing. She's one of the pioneers in ecological catalysm, so the boundary between ecology and chemistry, and she developed more than 44 blueprints, I believe. So someone big we could have had, but instead we still have a bit of her in a video that we're gonna have to start very soon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Est-ce que vous pouvez lancer la... Ouais, super.
In my presentation, I propose to share a new vision on green and sustainable
Est-ce que vous pouvez monter le son, s'il vous plaît?
based on a new concept that my group named eco-catalysis. Eco-catalysis is at the interface of scientific ecology and sustainable chemistry. Why this approach? There is an agreement that the world we live is changing. Human activities have contributed to climate change, erosion of biodiversity, reduction of arable lands, destruction of habitat of many species, and environmental damage. Our lifestyles has led to globalization of life and the uncontrolled multiplication of microorganisms, insects, and plants. It's clear that human behavior needs to change. It is interesting to note that consumerism is changing in agreement with Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations. As consumers become more aware, they want to know more about the products they buy. They wonder about product origins, production methods, product quality, and ecological implications. Today, consumers are demanding for natural or organic products, which motivates innovation and green approaches. Such ethical consumerism is having a major impact on chemical industry, safety of ingredients, organic and ethical sourcing of ingredients, eco-design, eco-friendly processes, green chemistry, ecological footprints, waste management, efficiency, and green economy are about to become priorities for some chemical companies. Chemical industry is inspired towards positive change and a sustainable future. Green chemistry and its 12 principles can become a solution. However, green chemistry only focuses on the future. We have no answer about the present situation and about what happened in the past. My co-workers and I want to take up this challenge. We want to promote a green and sustainable chemistry that both prevents and solves past, current, and future environmental problems. How can we take up this challenge? Our main goal is to develop a bio-inspired chemistry based on the adaptive capacity of plants to metallic stress. New Caledonia is a demonstrative example. You can see here the most beautiful lagoon on Earth, which is classified as one of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. This territory is a biodiversity hotspot and homes more than 3,000 plant species, 74% of which are endemic. This richness is a consequence of unusual climatic and endemic conditions, with high concentration of nickel in soil. The endemic biodiversity of New Caledonia includes plants having an impressive adaptability to nickel concentration in soils. They have the ability to accumulate on or hyperaccumulate nickel or manganese from the soils into the aerial parts. For example, this tree On the right side, on the slide with the blue sap, contains 20% of nickel in sap. Caledonian nickel deposits represent 20 to 25% of the global nickel resources. This is an economic issue of primary importance. Now we will discuss about another consequence of edaphic conditions, which are anthropogenic activities. Here we can see mining operation in New Caledonia, next to the lagoon, which is threatened by increasing nickel mining operations. All Caledonian mines are open pits. At the beginning of the exploitation, the vegetation and the topsoil is removed. To date, at last 30,000 hectares have been affected by mining activities. Cyclones, violent storms lead to the leaching of sediment ponds. Soil, floodplains, fields, rivers are contaminated. Biodiversity is reduced. Soils are eroded. My lab worked for 10 years in New Caledonia to develop a huge program of ecological rehabilitation of mining sites, with the logistic support of French mining operators. This program is based on endemic species, especially with nickel and manganese hyper-accumulating plains. It's clear that there is a link between pollution of soils and pollution of aquatic ecosystems. The water easily spreads metallic elements within its environment. Therefore, we are interested in this global concern, the conservation of water resources with a similar approach. We have studied specific aquatic plants which are able to concentrate metals into roots with exceptional performances. We have shown that the passive and not an active accumulation. Roots exhibit an ideal chemical structure to absorb metallic pollutants. We have developed a methodology to transform roots into a powder which shows the same accumulation performance. Thus, we have used this powder to clean up wastewater easily with a plant filter. This ecotechnology can be adapted to batch mode or continuous process to clean up water from chemical industry, quarrying, mining, and agricultural activities. Based on the performance of this new ecotechnology, we have just developed an innovative company called BioInspire. This flexible and robust tool can be applied to different contexts. Strategic metals, such as palladium and rhodium, whose prices are exploding. Primary metals, such as manganese, nickel, copper, zinc, iron, whose global depletion of the mineral resources is worrying. And toxic metals, such as arsenic, cobalt, lead, cadmium. However, the development of the ecotechnology is still restricted by the fact that contaminated biomass is not recovered. These aerial parts of hyperaccumulating plains and plant powder were considered as contaminated wastes. It has clearly been shown that phytoremediation without biomass recovery is not sustainable. What can we do with this biomass? What can we do with their contaminated leaves, roots, powders? Our strategy is only based on ecology. We also want to bring an economic dimension. To do so, we have developed an unprecedented chemical recovery of subsequent biomass. Using the leaves, roots, and powder enriched in metallic elements, we transform them into metal catalysts that we have called ecocatalysts in chemistry. Eco-catalysts have been used as catalysts in synthetic transformation or allowing access to molecules with high added value for fine and industrial chemistry. The activity, selectivity, and recyclability of eco-catalysts have been illustrated in numerous reactions, such as reaction promoted by Lewis and eco-catalysts. The potential of this area is huge and has led to a lot of applications. This conclusion is illustrated by the number of patents and scientific articles. Bio-based solvent and eco-friendly conservative are marketed by Untitled company. Ecocatalysis has also been used for oxidation in growing conditions. Why oxidations? Most of the oxidative reagents are toxic and ecotoxic. They are prohibited by REACH regulations. Patents and subsequent publications demonstrated that the high potential of ecocatalysts as alternatives to oxidative reagents prohibited by REACH regulation. Ecomanganese allowing the production and the commercialization of sensitive epoxides such linalool epoxide. I can mention the production of monomers for biodegradable plastics and for fragrance. Ecocatalysts can be used in grain reductions. They are considered as a grain alternative method for reduction of different functional groups. The advantages are clear. No toxic reduction agents, no hazardous waste, no industrial risks, and eco-friendly solvents in contrast to conventional systems. Cross-coupling reaction is a modern method to create carbon-carbon link. Maybe you have know the Nobel Prize of 2010 in this area. However, the cost of palladium is exploding. In a difficult geopolitical context, especially with Russia, the supply of palladium is at risk. It is clear that combining ecological recycling of palladium and eco-palladium for cross-coupling is an opportunity. As application, I can mention the synthesis of drugs for pharmaceutical companies. The development of this new concept has created a paradigm shift in sustainable and green chemistry. Metallic wastes are becoming new eco-friendly and efficient catalytic systems. I have no time to illustrate these results. However, I can consider that more over 5,000 biomolecules have been synthesized by ecocatalysis. All mechanisms of organic synthesis have been revisited. Finally, and thanks to patents, the ecocatalysis concept has allowed to create one company in New Caledonia and 3 startups in France. I am pleased to have had the opportunity to speak to you, and I thank you for your attention. I wish you an excellent conference of green sustainable chemistry. Many thanks.
Nice talk, but we won't have the opportunity to ask her any question. But maybe we can, if we can gather them and maybe ask her by mail. So it's something that we can do later if someone is really interested into that. Now we will have our next panelist, which is Ana Rodriguez. So Ana is working in Montpellier, and she's at the CNRS, so Center for National Research, and she's working in conservation and the links with also the policy, and she's leading an ITN, an innovative training network, international training network, across 8 different countries with 14 institutions. I got it right. So working also with in pure science, but also with some institutions such as BirdLife International on the IUCN, if that's it. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the organizers who have done an excellent job so far, and thank you all of you to be here, for being here. So, thank you for the introduction. My name is Ana Rodrigues. I am originally from Portugal. I did lots of mobility. I now currently am based in France. I am a MSCA alumni as well, having had a postdoc, benefited from a postdoc a few years ago. And currently, as Aaron was saying, I'm also the scientific coordinator of an international project, an ITN, which is now called Doctoral Networks. So it's one of the MSCA actions based to devoted to the training at the doctoral level. So it's a project which is training is now finishing to train 15 PhD students across Europe. And so I am an ecologist by training. My work is on the conservation of biodiversity, and this specific ITN project is on conservation of biodiversity, and specifically on the interface between science and policy of international biodiversity conservation. So it is a project which includes a set of academic institutions across Europe, but also some of the main international conservation organizations that are involved directly in helping, nudging, lobbying, forcing governments to try to go in the right direction, particularly in terms of conservation of biodiversity, but also other environmental issues. So it includes, for example, the International Union for Conservation of Nature and BirdLife International. So our projects were co-constructed with these conservation organizations so that each project is helping to inform a particular policy aspect at the international level within the framework, particularly of the Convention on Biological Diversity, but others as well. I'm not going to be talking about those projects. So by default, we are pretty much all happy. It's part of our second nature to us to try to be as conservation-oriented as possible, as environmentally sustainable as possible. So when we created the project, the Green Charter was not yet, did not exist, but a lot of the recommendations we just did them because it's part of our nature, try to reduce as much as possible our impact in our activities, to reduce travel, and so on. So I'm just going to mention one specific thing we did as part of our project, actually replies to one of your points of like the training, and we did try to embed training on sustainability, and specifically in this case on carbon emissions and carbon offsetting into our program. What we did was that it was one of the fellows' projects. So the fellows had joint projects that made them work together throughout the entire project. And one of their joint projects was they were actually responsible for our green strategy of the project. So they were charged with keeping track of our carbon emissions, of giving us suggestions for reducing those, and at the end they did our carbon accounting, and they also proposed how we should offset. They chose the way by which we offset our carbon emissions. So this was a way we had of specifically making sure that by the end of the project they all knew about carbon offsettings, where it comes from, how we try to reduce it. So we embedded these into the training directly. And the other thing I'd like to say is that if I started again, and in fact we are trying to start again because we're preparing a new project, may or may not be funded, but we are preparing a new one. The lessons we learned from the previous project, and also with all the COVID and the Zoom meetings that we had, actually we can now make it better. We've learned that a lot of the reductions in terms of impact have to come at the design level of the project, because by definition these projects have a lot of traveling, and there is no way. In fact, I think now we can get away with proposing less travel than before. Before, in a sense, we really had to propose lots of meetings and reunions and all these things. It was impossible not to travel a lot to actually get one of these projects accepted. I think it was so expected that we had to do all these meetings. And now we actually became much, in this project we are creating now, we're embedding much more the idea that we try to separate between the travels which are useful because it's fundamental to see people in person. We also lived through the Zoom years, and we know that we cannot just do everything by Zoom. It's really, it's not possible. So we're actually becoming much more clever at trying to separate the activities that are useful to do in person from the activities we can do separately. So for example, management meetings, Zoom, but all the things that have to do with practical training, we try to put people together in the same room. One final point before I hand on to the next speaker is that in my lab, so I am based at the Center for Evolutionary and Functional Ecology in Montpellier. We are trying to adopt, well actually we have just voted, our council has voted a new green charter, which has two levels. One is an institutional charter, which sets our principles, what we think is important in terms of sustainable research. And then it has an individual charter, which is like the Green Charter, the MSCA Green Charter, not mandatory, but advisory, where we're trying to establish good practice. And this is part of a bigger attempt by our lab to try to make science somehow differently. In French, it's faire la science autrement. Try to do things a bit differently. It involves also other things that have been discussed today already, like the quality of the science, slow science, having time for thinking, having time not thinking just about publication. So it has broader issues than just the environmental sustainability. But there is a real effort in our lab to try to think how we can do embed in our research, including in our research questions, embed sustainability as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Any question?
I have a question. Sorry, how did you do to measure all the carbon? How did you do to measure all the carbon fingerprint or footprint on your activities?
Yes, that's a very good point, because we didn't measure it all. We just measured the easy part, which is another lesson for future. So we measured the easy part, which is the traveling. And in fact, for example, in my lab now, we are trying to measure our footprint as a lab. And we do the easy part, we do the traveling, but we're also trying to do the part of the consumables, as in the energy embedded in the production, for example, of computers and so on. And the part where we still haven't managed to measure yet is all the computer use. All the, and it actually, that part exploded in the past few years. So what we did in our project, which has already been measured and offset, it's actually the easy one, which is just the traveling. But what we're trying to do in our lab is actually, in Montpellier, is try to measure the full spectrum. And some of those parts are actually quite difficult.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Hi, I was just wondering if you succeeded to write everything in your proposal. Everything you just said, it's really great, but you know it takes some places in the proposal. There is now 45 pages in the doctoral network. So yeah, I'm just wondering how did you manage to do that?
So in the previous proposal, which we applied in 2017 or 18, there was no Green Charter yet, so we didn't make a big effort. This was just things we do normally. We do, as in reduced consumption. So we weren't trying to, in a sense, sell that as part of the process. If I was writing the proposal now, I would emphasize that strongly in the implementation, as being part of the implementation decisions. So that's the part in the MSCA applications. It's in the implementation. Good luck in your proposal.
Thank you. It sounds really great, your project. I would have one question. Since you are in a lab which is dealing with environmental issues, you're probably more aware of all these things. So do you have an advice for someone who is working in a big institution trying to do some good stuff in the Marie Curie project and like trying to do some bottom-up in big institutions?
Well, from our experience, actually, the young people are much more sensitive to these issues and actually can be a force for good in the sense that I think I'm not saying that students are at the bottom. That's not what I mean. But actually, I think you can start even at the student level, just thinking, how do we organize ourselves? How do we, for example, this charter we have in our lab is completely non-mandatory. it's a good practice. But we're also thinking that maybe we could have people given the option of saying, I actually commit to this. To say, for example, one of the things in our charter is for trips of less than 8 hours, I'll take the train. So that's kind of it's personal effort. It's actually, you can't force people to do that because it's on their time, and they sometimes have families and things. So you cannot force people to do that. But you can say, well, I myself feel like I can commit to that. So you can create by example, and we actually heard about this already today, how leading by example can actually make a difference. So, and I think you can start with young people, the students, the postdocs. It does not have to start with the old folks in the organizations.
No other question? Okay, great. I do have one. If you had only one recommendation for greening the future of science, what would it be?
It's to think when you start the project, because once you're doing it, once you've decided on your theme, on where you're going to go, where your field work is, if you have field work, what you're experimenting, then you're stuck. So if you want to make a difference, it has to be in the design stage of your research.
Very good. So, as an example, you would be interested in hiring a consultant or a company to just develop your project better or make it greener?
No, I would get the researchers to think about that.
Okay.
It's great to have consultants coming in for support.
It's good. It's good. But as an example, would you listen to someone that is working in making labs more sustainable?
Absolutely. We've just been...
Martin, here we go.
What a great idea. I have an idea. Let's ask people who work specifically on this.
Should I start? Yes?
Yeah, please.
It's a fantastic introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Martin Farley. I work at University College London, Green Lab Associates, and King's College London as well, around making science more sustainable. Just to kick off just now, could I just ask I can see my face quite large there. That's not what I expected. Okay. Could I just ask a question of the audience? How many of you have worked in a lab or work in a lab? Just to get a feel. Okay, it's a good amount. You can raise your hands. So I'll throw out some figures for you just to start. You might have heard of ultra-low temperature freezers, -80s, the one that they use for the Pfizer vaccine. Each one of those uses about as much energy as a house. They can use a lot more. A fume cupboard, if you work in a chemistry lab, uses about 2 to 3 houses worth of energy. And we don't actually know the full carbon emissions of science. We don't. I can give a guess, but yeah. Air travel is around 2%, data centers 1 to 2%. Science is probably around 1.5. I don't know. We don't know. But we know that it's around 2% of the world's GDP, and 0.1% of the world are researchers. So you're having at least a massive outsized impact in terms of the finances, and very likely an outsized impact in terms of the environment. So what can we do? Well, we can do a lot of actions around making our labs and science more environmentally sustainable. We talk about travel a lot. We can change the way we run our labs. We can change the way we use our freezers and our fume cupboards and interact with our chemicals. Green chemistry was raised by one of the speakers and might be raised by the next one as well. Bio, sorry, apologies. But there's still good examples. So there's a lot we can do around this space. I will say that one of the conflicts that we see in this is the same conflict we have at home, which is about the balance between carbon and energy consumption. And what I mean by that is that if you were to buy a diesel car yesterday, and then you said, actually, I want to be sustainable, and I want a Tesla, and you threw out your diesel car, you would actually be worse for the planet, because you've bought that car and you've thrown it out immediately. And that's that balance between embodied carbon of manufacturing and energy consumption of the efficiency of the vehicle. We have that same challenge in science, Is reusing consumables better? You have to use an autoclave and et cetera. And we know that doing dishes at home is better, but within a lab, it's more challenging to reuse things. And there's a lot of other constraints, and I know that they exist. But if you looked at labs of old, we used to reuse a lot more. And we've gone a certain direction with this, which is very single use. Around 2% of the world's plastic waste was estimated to come from research labs in 2014. So it's plastic-wise, it's very high intensity. So, you know, there is the need for more research in this space because there's a lot of things we don't understand. In the UK, we're lucky because the Medical Research Council recently put out the first grant I've ever seen of its kind that put out £1 million that said, how do you make science sustainable? Because we don't know. We don't know how to do net zero science. You know, nobody knows. I don't have the answer for you, and we still don't have the answer. But the Medical Research Council, one of the largest funders, put out £1 million to say, how do you do it? And the fact that one of the largest funders put out this sum, you know, validates our efforts because it says, you know, we need to do this. And I should add as well, the UK, we've had the largest funder, which is MRC is a part of, but UKRI, put out a net zero target for 2040, which means that their funding recipients will eventually have to, you know, be net zero as well. So this is definitely a game changer for us. Now, we need more research in this space, and you can hear some of the research, but I have to be honest, we need action now. You know, you've heard about the IPCC report, the timelines. It's, you know, it's terrible stuff. You know, it's not looking very great. You know, and we need action now. And you know, the analogy I like to give is that you know, when governments wanted to make science safe, they didn't say everybody go invent their own safety standard. And that's kind of what we've done with sustainability. We've said everybody go and figure yourself out. You know, go figure out your own standards and figure out how to be sustainable. I would argue that we don't have time for that. We need central standards in how to make science more environmentally sustainable now. And actually, Marlène, she said before, you know, the number one thing people said is that they wanted guidance. You know, they wanted help on how to make their actions, their research sustainable now. And so from UCL, what we've done is we've created something called LEAF. LEAF is a standard, or I guess a certification in sustainable science. It focuses on resource-intensive science, so, you know, particularly wet labs, but we've started creating other versions because it turns out there's all these specialist environments that want to be sustainable. You know, don't mention them much, but animal facilities are extremely resource-intensive. Data centers are extremely resource-intensive. Clinical labs have blown up with COVID, and they're extremely resource-intensive. And everybody's seeking guidance on how to be sustainable now. So LEAF is a set of criteria that you can take, and embedded in the tool are some calculators. The calculators allow you to estimate the carbon you save, but also the money you save, because we're not going to ask you to go throw away your lab equipment. We're going to ask you to use it better and to manage it better, to use your consumables better. And everything is costing more money right now. We all know it for everything. So there is money to be saved by being more efficient and sustainable. I'll just say is that LEAF it's gone quicker than I could have expected. We launched it last year after piloting it for a few years. And we thought we'd get 10 or 20 institutions to sign up, and we've had 70 institutions sign up in the past year from 12 countries, which is awesome. Yeah, it's grown much quicker than we could have expected. None in France yet. If anybody wants to join, that'd be fantastic. You're very welcome to. You know, one of the aims that I will say is to engage with funders. I know Marie Curie, there's a lot of funding that goes out, and you know, at the end of the day, we said we need standards. We need this to be integrated in funding. You know, these criteria need to be set so that if you meet funding, and you will meet these certain standards of efficiency and sustainability. So that's why we're engaging with funders. The Medical Research Council now have put LEAF in their own institutes, which is great. And we have a lot more work to do. We have a lot more development to do in this space. But that's what we're working on, is trying to make science more sustainable. So I'll stop there. Thank you, and I'll pass over to, yes. Oh, no, sorry, this is questions or not. So, thank you.
Do one here.
Thank you. You mentioned that, well, there are some studies to try to see how we can actually measure the carbon footprint. Do you know if there are any studies to see how we can implement some measures without affecting the science? Because I work with a lot of molecular biologists, and every time we bring these issues, sometimes like, well, instead of plastic pipettes, you can use glass pipettes, etc. It's their main concern, that it will affect the science. And in the end, we don't have facts to show that it might not. Sometimes what I do is share my experience, which was from working in labs with less resources, where at the time we were precisely doing a lot, but just because we did not have money to spend on disposable material. And so sometimes I tell them, well, I managed to work like that, and they're sometimes a bit dismissive. So do you know of anything like that?
To be honest, a colleague of mine, Benoit Nicolet, we just put out a paper. It's on bioRxiv, and we've submitted it, but it's more the life cycle assessment, because the first question we had is it better? With an autoclave and all the extra resource that goes into washing, we wanted to know, is it better? Because it is more resource intensive to reuse in a lab than our dishes at home. We put out that paper, and it to essentially show, yes, by the way, it is better, and you actually save money despite the staff costs as well. And so, for the investment in labor and et cetera, it's worth it. I will say that we don't have all the answers yet, and to people here, the fact that the MRC put out money to facilitate exactly this type of research, because we don't have all the answers. And I will say too, for anybody that's interested, we need more research in this space. We need more papers, and it's a green fields topic. There's so many questions that we have. What's the impact of liquid nitrogen versus a freezer? We just got a grant finally for this from this MRC, but we need more research in it. So we know it's better now, but I can't tell you the exact conditions, of course, and they all depend on what you're doing as well, to be frank. There is a lot of variability in what every lab is doing. So we're starting.
Okay.
No, sorry, my question was very similar to that one, so yeah. That's
okay. Paolo?
Thank you. Do you also consider the overall research value chain in your policies? Because today, lots of research activities are outsourced, for example, but also instrumental activities, not the core business of research, is very much decentralized in terms of organization of the overall research activity. So do you also consider, I'm a little bit concerned about England and UK in general, because now with the Brexit, you are not anymore subject to EU regulation. These aspects of the value chains are covered by different directives and regulations. I think about, for example, public procurement directive that obliges companies in the value chain to implement and respect the labor and environmental standards. There is a proposal about due diligence obligations of companies, and as well as public authorities. So do you consider the outsourced activities of research in your policies, and what do you think about this problem if you don't?
It's a big question. So I will say, so far I haven't seen any regression from the policies that were existing before. We still do consider anti-slavery laws and et cetera in procurement, and those are there. The one thing that I say, what we'll say we don't see, is essentially embodied carbon in large-scale procurement, and in part because we don't know. You hear about the scopes 1, 2, and 3 of carbon, and all our targets are around scopes 1 and 2, which is the energy we consume. The scope 3 is all the stuff we buy, and that's the much larger amount of impact we have as an institution, is all the, the procurement. And we have a hard time setting targets for it because we can't even quantify it yet. If you buy, something at home, you can see your energy efficiency of your fridge at home, but you have no idea how much carbon it took to manufacture it. And the impacts of manufacturing. So it's very hard for us to set targets in this space, which is why we thought we needed more life cycle assessments and research in this space to enable that type of those type of policies. So I will just say in centralization that we do recommend for the use of things like core facilities and centralized platforms, in part because it also improves reproducibility of research. When you use centralized resources, either it's companies or core facilities or et cetera, typically the science is more reproducible, it's quicker, and it's more efficient. And that's a win for everybody. So I will say with LEAF very quickly, I just want to throw this in, but with LEAF, we attached reproducibility with sustainability in recognition that if your science is not reproducible, well, it's not the most sustainable and maybe not the best representative of the resources that went into producing that research. So yes. I went a little bit off there.
Across the 70 institutions that have sought LEAF certification, did you find any commonalities amongst the types
To be honest, there's been very different approaches to how to implement these things, in part because there isn't, if you go to each institution, there's a health and safety directorate. You know where you go and you know who's responsible for these things. Making sure science is sustainable kind of falls to, and in part that's why it gets lost a bit, because it falls to such a wide group of people that everybody's so busy with everything that, it's the PhDs, the postdocs, the technicians, the lab managers, the PI, all these people, the administrators, everybody has a role in this space. I will say that I've seen a couple examples. A University of Exeter didn't go through their sustainability team, they went through their technicians and lab managers. And they were the second institution I've seen in the world that got 100% of their labs to participate within a year. Because, technicians are there. They're more present often than PhD students in terms of, I don't mean over the course of a day, but I know PhDs are. But, they'll stay there for multiple years and maybe not change institutions as often. So I think increasingly we need to have the technicians and lab managers really a part of the conversation and invest in them more if we're going to get these places to be more sustainable. So very different approaches at different sites. But there's not one that wins all. Also, institutions are built so differently. Everybody's structured differently. So it's very, I've learned a lot about the differences. I thought it would be the same, but it's people don't even, an institute doesn't mean the same thing in different institutions. It's confusing.
Okay, I have just one quick question. Do you ever meet resistance in your process of making the science more sustainable or more green, from the institution, from the people working there? Is this because inertia, lack of means, or just people not caring about it?
Yeah, we meet all types of resistance. And I will say when I started in this, people were like, why are you doing this? Science is very important. Why should you're just slowing it down in some ways by influencing with sustainability. But there are different reasons. Time is a big issue. Nobody has time for anything today. Money for investment in technicians, understanding whether or not you can reuse something, so the knowledge isn't always there. But I will say that there's been a change in the past few years. And a really good example is in the UK when Blue Planet came out with David Attenborough. Nobody asked about plastics before that. And I swear you could tell the months that came after that, I got so many more emails that said, what are we doing about plastics? So, things are changing, attitudes are changing, and it's a lot easier now than it was 9 years ago.
Okay, and what's your attitude to fix that or to go around this kind of resistances?
To be honest, you choose depending on the person because of whatever their barrier is. If it's financial, then you try to evidence the fact that being more sustainable saves money. If it's about the research or whether or not you can reuse it, then you try to find research and data that supports them in those actions. So it really does depend on what their barrier is at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, time for last speaker, which is Alexandra Dubini. So, Alexandra is working at the University of Cordoba, and she does have a lot of experience in USA into sustainable science on renewable energies, and now she's working on biomass, biofuels, and biofooling on this.
Remediation.
Bioremediation, yeah. A bit linked to what Claude Grison was talking about earlier. So
hi everyone, thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me, and I also am here on behalf of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. So I do work on bioremediation, wastewater bioremediation using green algae and bacteria consortiums. Anything related to biofuels and hydrogen production also out of those microorganisms. And out of the biomass, we do use that for biofertilization. So it's kind of in line of what we've heard before from Claude Grison, but with a perspective on it's more biology-based. So we do have a role, I would say, into sustainability. Because we try to work into a closed circle. We use our microalgae. We produce anything we can, especially hydrogen, from it. And then to grow them, we use wastewater, any kind of wastewater. We link them to bacteria so they can really uptake any kind of contaminant, nitrogen, anything that is there, and then with the biomass, use that for biofertilization or bioplastic. To say that, so we are really into trying to help in the transition world where algae could help us. So I always try to advocate about this little beast. But so here, as a representative of the Marie Curie, as a vice chair of the association, really what I wanted to talk about is that as an association, we are trying to lead by example, like was Dr. Chevalier said this morning. When we organized events, for example, in 2019, we were trying to be very eco-friendly. It was actually a very eco-friendly event. We had around 650 people coming to Vienna. But of course, 3 years later, in 2022, thanks to COVID, we had to adapt, right? And the norm changed. So again, referring at this morning, and that helped us develop an event that is hybrid. And so we went from 650 people to around 150 people on site. And we were actually quite happy, even though it was a lot of work. And thanks to Gledson, who is here in the room, and also Mostafa, our previous chair, they did a remarkable job of creating a space where really the online people and the presential people could participate in this type of event. And we, within that, so within the event, we have session, one that was dedicated to greening research and higher education. And Martin Ferle was already there with us, helping us understand how to improve our research and be more sustainable. And from that, within that session, we also had a webinar on how to go green in the lab. So within the association, we are trying our best to do things to, well, first leading by example, but to raise awareness on what to do, also guidelines. From the first event, a set of guidelines came out to help all of our members and chapters chair, working group to design events that are more sustainable or eco-friendly, I would say. And then within that, we also have, we highlight the work that is being done on sustainability from our members. We have a workshop and also webinars from specific chapters. An example was from the Brazilian chapter. We have also promotion through newsletters dedicated. We are dedicating special issues on, for example, Green Deal. And actually, we have a policy working group dedicating on helping us understanding really what the European Commission is doing with the Green Deal and how we can apply that in our research and within the association. So I would say that those are the action points that we have within the association, and we always welcome any new initiative. So because like it was said before, young people are always full of energy, full of ideas, and anyone willing to contribute, we are happy to hear you and to help us even improve that within the association. There's many ideas that could be developed, having a task force on sustainability that is more, for example, more active, or developing awards for researchers that have a brilliant idea on how to implement, for example, the Green Charter within the project. Anything. We need manpower, so the more the merrier, I would say. And also, I think for the future, what we want to do is connect with other associations and perhaps dedicate time on promoting and training people on what's being done out there, For example, with the LEAF project, maybe understanding what's available for each institution and how to train people, like Paolo was suggesting before. I think it's actually very important. And something I think would be very important is to bind in the contract the Green Charter of Marie Curie's fellows, and that would really do the link with what Paolo was saying. I think when we have a contract, we are bound to our employer, and why not having a binding contract on the Green Charter? Doesn't mean that you have to write your project around the Green Charter. It just means that when you are signing a Marie Curie fellowship contract, you are bound to follow those guidelines. And I think, yeah. Yeah.
First of all, hello, I'm David. I am part of the Falling Walls. Yeah. But this is a question for all of you, actually, not specifically to one. As an MSCA, what we have is that we have a time project that is 3 years. And sometimes if we go through this green synthesis, it's very challenging because, for example, I'm working with bioresorbable polymers. If we go to the green synthesis, it takes around 8 hours, 12 hours. But if you go to the traditional way, it will be in 1 hour. Sometimes we are sacrificing more the time of the machine and damaging more, using more the green synthesis than the traditional way. But how can we implement the green chapter into our projects, having the support of the Marie Curie as well?
That's a good question. Okay. I think we all have this problem in the lab. Yes. And that's why I think we need more research on understanding how to improve that. I don't know if you have a specific answer from your experience.
I don't work specifically on labs, but I do think that we all learn how to optimize under constraint, right? And so, for example, you have a fixed budget, don't you? And you work within that budget. And if it was bigger, you would do other things. But you work within that budget. And I actually think that at some point in the future, we should have like a carbon budget or some kind of budget, a limit to how much we can actually spend in terms of environment. And then we will optimize within that. And if everybody else is doing that, you're not competing with other people that have illimited budget. So it will actually lower, in a sense, put the same constraints on everybody. And we actually already have a precedent for that, which is with animal welfare. Animal welfare, for people who deal with that, creates a constraint to everybody. And it's a pain, because you suddenly can't do some things, and you have to be certified for others, and so on. And it is a real constraint. I mean, human welfare is a constraint, labor law, all of these things are constraints that, in a sense, make science less optimal, because it's not the Far West, and we can't just do everything we want. But they make it a better world, they make it fairer, and if everybody has the same constraints, I think then we all find then ways of optimizing our work and our science within those common constraints. So one of my recommendations for me for funders would be actually start putting those constraints on us so that we can all be on the same level, so that we can all find the best way within those constraints. So it doesn't help you, but
You actually have the opposite problem that we are facing with the energy transition. If you take, for example, workers in the car industry, to produce an electric engine, it requires half of time of producing a petrol engine. So what they do is dismissals. Perhaps your institution can hire more researchers to support you in implementing your project?
Hi, I'm Alba Alvarez. I'm also part of the Falling Walls. Falling Walls. Yeah, it's also a comment from Alexandra. I think that is brilliant, the idea that the fact that we have to sign the green deal when we are signing for the Marie Curie, but I think that it will be also interesting that the host institution is providing the tools
I forgot to add that. It's exactly what I was thinking, is that the host institution has to sign it and the fellow has to sign it. So it's a binding contract, binding contract.
Yeah, so they're saying that when we are...
So everyone is on the same line and everyone understands what they have to do.
Yeah, but that's true. We only have like 2 years, and if we are spending most of our time...
Forever.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Just a quick comment about this issue of signing obligations in the contract. Likely in some countries there are sectoral collective agreements in specific industries that are already providing specific provisions to make the work relationships more greener. So I think an important role should be played by the trade unions and employers associations in the public sector, and recalling, for example, the Green Charter in collective bargaining agreements.
Just to finish, I think one where the MSCA program could have some power here is that they could have their own civil code, meaning that they can only give those fellowships where the institutions are willing to recognize, for example, that the Green Charter is something binding.
There's a precedent for that.
The
Horizon Europe agreement. It's now one of the new. So it's not compulsory yet. I know. The organizations that sign the beneficiaries of grant agreements on Horizon Europe should be aiming towards having a policy on gender equality. So that's a different. So it's in that direction of saying nudging. Now it's still not obligatory, but in the next ones will be saying you will have to have a gender equality agreement. So it could be exactly the same.
That's correct. And actually, when you apply, you have to say that your institution has a guideline on gender equality. Yeah, and people lie. Okay.
Just throw in, I guess, I got the microphone, but I just...
I will have one remark to do, like with the fact of the institution and the research fellow signing a charter for making it green. But in case if you have to do a lot of field work, like I just think about my experience, like back in the days, I used to use quads, helicopters, boats, four-wheel drives. Yeah, so I was polluting a lot, and then plus the amounts of plastic I was using because it was super easy. But to go in the field, I had really no other choice. And it was still funded. And one thing was for life project, like then for MSCA. How do I do? Like, do I sacrifice my whole project because of the Green Charter, or maybe? And then it can almost make it ineligible, which can be quite annoying because the research that has to be done can be can bring some very interesting results. Like, in the time I was taking the helicopter, it was to study the kagu in New Caledonia, so like umbrella species. It was crucial, but I was polluting a lot, and so if it makes it ineligible, are we killing science? Or can we maybe think of something like if there is a Green Charter, you have extra points when you apply for the MSCA funds that are quite competitive, like something like this, maybe in between, or I don't know.
There was a hand raising there. I don't know if
I didn't see it.
Yeah. I'll just give an example. I don't want to talk. Your research is, the British Antarctic Survey are the ones that are studying a lot of the melting of the polar ice caps, and they're quite conscious that when they send.
Marlene, we can see you. It's okay, keep going.
The Science and Technology Funding Council has an extremely large magnet, which uses about, I think the energy it can use as much as 10% of the City of London at some point for this particular magnet. And, they were never conscious about the energy that went into it until, to be honest, energy prices went up. So we're not trying to say to stop your science, and, there is a lot of good science that is resource intensive. but it has made them reconsider how they can do it and find ways to mitigate at the same time and decide which experiments are worth it. So, you know, I think I know I do come in quite heavy about the environmental impacts of science, but it's not to say that we need to stop science, but a lot of it can be done more efficiently at the same time. So there is a balance between that.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, my name is Gladson. I'm Vice Chair of the MSCA Alumni Association. My question is more like, how do we guarantee that the European size will still be competitive in the long term if, for example, other regions do not have like their scientists with too much constraints, or it's more like how do we do not prevent the opposite?
Same problem with industry, isn't it?
Oh, the law, yeah, it's a...
Tough one.
A law issue. I think it depends on how we define competitiveness. For example, in the taxonomy regulation, there are many arguments and attempts, and not only to include social aspects within the definition of environmental sustainability, but also attempts to include environmental sustainability within social aspects and economic aspects. So if you give a definition of competitiveness, which already includes sustainability for the environment, for labor, for example, then you can easily compete with countries that does not have this kind of approach to research. And an argument for that was already raised by the audience, I think, before answering one of the questions, is that environmental sustainability is not necessarily in opposition with economic sustainability. The challenge of sustainable development is to strike a balance between the three different interests behind the three pillars of sustainability. So there are opportunities to argue and to practice the idea of sustainability without having a negative impact on the economic dimension of development. So this is the only reflection that I can oppose to your provocative question.
Could I add to that, actually? Just want to add quickly is that I would argue is that by integrating sustainability is how we stay competitive. If you were to survey students about what they want from their institutions, you know, all the international students that we're trying to attract, you know, they want sustainability to be embedded within the institutions, and quite often they're picking institutions based on those factors. And US National Union of Students does these massive surveys across the UK, and sustainability has risen to be one of the most, it is basically that and location is what students care about. And the other thing to say is that, you know, right now we're in a moment where resources are abundant, but, you know, they're not abundant. We saw for the first time labs running out of supplies. If you're working in a lab with NMRs, you know, liquid helium is a very finite resource, and we saw emails going around that you cannot access, you're not allowed to purchase more liquid helium. So the institutions that actually installed systems to capture and liquefy and recycle their heliums are the ones that can keep doing experiments. So, you know, there are some cases where we're going to have to take more time and invest in it, but I think there are ways to look at it as a benefit in the sense to make it, to stay competitive with other folks that don't do those things.
Just another quick example about the competitiveness aspect of sustainability. If you take, for example, the Dieselgate, Volkswagen lost billions of euros because of the international environmental disaster that they created. So they lost investments, they have lost returns, clients. So yeah, that's another example on how sustainable development, environmentally sustainable development can contribute rather than to reduce competitiveness of firms. And researchers as well. I mean, the argument goes in parallel.
And just to go back to the talk from this morning, because I thought it was very powerful, I think the change of norm and the reputation that is behind it is helping us right now to do the right thing. And all together, I think we can go in the right direction and take action now, because that's what we need.
Okay. Sorry. Just to make sure, of course, I think that's the only way we should go. But it's just so we are aware of any potential problems that may come. So I was thinking more like if we have two leading scientists competing, one in a country that doesn't have any limits on carbon or expenditure or anything, and the potential like competitiveness. Yeah.
Hi, Marie Gerald from INT Atlantique. I'm also with Falling Walls. I noticed that a lot of you were talking about how like your research also connected or was affected by other fields. I think there was a mention of like working with animals. Obviously with like algae, you're dealing with like a little bit of agriculture. And I think one of you even mentioned how like just TVs and like a movie kind of affected how much people engaged with you. And I think a lot of us probably have research that is either affected by or could affect individuals in other fields, or at least we can work with other individuals in our university. So I was wondering if you had any like suggestions about incorporating different fields or labs into this discussion, or if there was like a field you could work with, what would you be like really interested, even if it wasn't scientific at all?
I will say that's come out of doing LEAF and this sustainable science stuff is that there's a lot of other, I mentioned it in the talk, but there's a lot of specialist environments that want to be sustainable as well. One of the ones we started working on is, it's a really tough spot, but is A&E, emergency rooms in the NHS. In the UK, I think they said around 5.6 or 6% of the, might be more, climate the emissions in the UK are from the NHS. Healthcare systems are very resource-intensive spaces. And again, they're tough spaces where people want to take action. And so with Greener NHS, and it was Royal College of Emergency Medicine, we wrote sort of a framework like LEAF, but for A&E doctors to, how can they run their units more sustainably? So I'm just giving that as an example, but I think the point is that there's, there's a lot more specialist environments, and me personally, I just think it would be fun to explore all the different environments that you all work in, if we haven't covered it, et cetera, and to look at how we can do that. And I mean, we are working on it with LEAF and other versions of it, but I think there's just so much more to be done. So at least me personally, that's what I would.
I would return the question to you. What would you do? We need you.
Well, I mean, like, for me, a lot of my research is kind of connected to entertainment. So I've done, like, education research that also looks at, like, creating games and creating, like, small films and things like that. But that comes, like, from my background as a former artist.
But it's related to sustainability?
Possibly. I mean, like I said, there was some discussion about what was it, Blue Planet, like started a whole discussion about like plastics and that sort of thing. And I know there's a lot of discussion kind of in my field on like how do we talk to the public, or how do we produce information that is both engaging and educational. But that is only from my point of view of like having this background in the arts and what I do with now. And I guess I was looking at like maybe you had your own stories of similar things, or even like ideas of like how to kind of begin these conversations.
I think there's so many things around us. People are engaged in so many actions.
I'm sorry. I hate to do this. I don't like to have the time coming in the way of a great conversation. But it's 2 to 4, and so it will be time to wrap up the session. And the good thing is, right after there is a cocktail, so everyone can. Yeah, the break is just right after, but tonight there is a cocktail, so you will be able to discuss with all of these about the solutions that you have. So first, I have to say thank you, everyone, for being so proactive in making this workshop a great workshop. And so great, I had to stop the conversation. So that made it work. Now it's time for conclusion. So myself, I don't have much to say, but the best way to have answers is to first asking questions on the axis around them. So I will ask each of the speakers to maybe propose us a good question for making science more green, and to see, use it as a conclusion on food for thought. So, Marlene, you are first.
Thanks. One sentence now, because I took a lot of notes. So yeah, you saw me watching my hair, but I also took some notes on suggestions to us at the Commission. I mean, I clearly see all the speakers' points on that we do need more research. So encouragement to the people listening here, please, apply for grants and do some research in the areas that were mentioned today. I think that with the alumni, we have a lot of work to cover. You speak of webinars, workshops, etc. I think there's a lot we can do here. Establishing a task force, why not? Awarding green awards to successful projects, why not? And I think we would be happy from the Commission side to even contribute to this effort, even financially. Training people, considering whether or not to mention the Green Charter in contracts between host and fellows. All of these things are good, I think, valid proposals, and I would be very happy to dig more into it with all of you. The Green Award criteria and carbon budget, I think, as you have seen today, need more discussion, so that we do not penalize the bottom-up nature of the project, the program. So if it were easy, we would have done it already, but I think we're not closed to that discussion, so I would be very happy to take it up as well. Sorry, that was more than one sentence, but a bit of a summary.
Thank you, Marlene. Anna?
You asked for a question, right? Not for the answers.
Yeah, just bring a question to the audience.
Well, for me, the question is, how do we make science more sustainable and fair?
Okay, thank you.
For me, the question is, how do you go back to your lab and actually try to get one point out the Green Charter and implement it?
I could say, have you signed up for leave? But that's too...
that's a great question.
No. Honestly, I would say, what pisses you off? Because that's what, what really gets you angry is what you're going to need to invest energy in it to make it better. So what gets you angry enough to take action in?
Would you recommend younger researchers to pick sustainable topics for their research? Because you can pollute a lot, but if you pollute to contribute to the progress of humans and our ecosystem, then you are polluting for something that is worth. So I would ask you whether you would like to recommend your students to choose for sustainable topics.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And I'm looking forward to see what this workshop will bring in the future and the proposal of Munir just after the break. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.